Right then, so what is this PiHole thing? Well, as their own website says, it's network-wide ad blocking. Now what that means is that instead of having your ad blocker in your browser, on your phone or whatever, you put this on your entire network and it filters everything on a DNS level before it even gets to your devices. And this has many advantages, one of which is on phones it tends to be hard to get an ad blocker going, and this would work with that, and you don't have to install an ad blocker individually on every device as long as you have it on the network. So there are multiple ways of installing this, as we see on their own page. One of the methods is through Docker, which I will also be going through, but the easier method, I guess, is to install it through just a shell script. So off of PiHole.net, it redirects us to their GitHub. Now what we're trying to do here is effectively pipe the entirety of the install script into the terminal. Now, this is not something you want to do unless you know what the code does. In this case, I guess we can trust them because we know it's straight off of PiHole, but you don't want to be piping stuff into your shell without knowing what's going on. And that's why they have other installation instructions. So let's try it this way first. Paste that in there. Try running it. So the first thing it tells us is that it needs a root access. So let's log in there. Great, it tells me that the OS distribution is not supported, so I guess we're going to have to try it a different way. But during the automated install, that would install everything on its own. It would configure the stuff and so on. So there wasn't much that they could have shown you there anyway, until you get to the GUI. So what we're going to show you now is the Docker way of installing it. So let's go to the magical file that my assistant prepared earlier and put into the oven. So what we're using here is Docker PiHole, which is a thing you can find on GitHub. Somebody already prepared the image for us. So the easiest way is to use a Docker Compose file. So this is a YAML file that you can just copy paste into a Docker Compose.yml, and then you can run Docker. So we already had a session on how to run Docker last week, but just make sure that before you try to run your Docker, you also have Docker Compose running, or you can also do it the normal Docker way. But most importantly, you need the system service to be running. Sometimes you'll get strange errors if you don't have that running. So if you have a systemd distribution, your command would be system control start Docker. Now, if it doesn't say anything, it means that it was already running, and that's fine. So I have already copy pasted into a Docker Compose the thing off of the website. As you can see, it's mostly the same. All I have changed is the time zone, and you can set the web passport straight in there. So all this file does is grab the latest PiHole image. It configures certain ports to be bound to the container. It sets the time zone. It sets the password for the web interface. This is not required, but it's a lot easier if you do that. And it configures some permanent volumes, which I have named so that if we try to, say, back up the container, spin it back down, and so on, it will be persisted. And if we check in this directory, I have also made a .env file. So just to show you again. You can do it without. So since the web password is not actually It's not terribly important unless you're exposing your thing to the whole internet. You can actually set it here to something like bad password. Obviously, you don't want to have this password be something used elsewhere because it will actually be printed out in the Docker log every time the container starts. So now let's spin this up. Docker compose up. So the first thing it will do is download the required image, and then it will bring up the container and everything. So if everything goes right, I would say done at the end. And what I was on about earlier is that if it finds that we configured a web password, it will actually show up in here. But if we hadn't configured one, it would be a random one, which would make it harder to access. Now, one of the things I did here is actually change the bound port from 53 to 5301. Now, why did I do that? Well, because if you go all the way down here, installing on Ubuntu, even though I'm running Arch, if you have systemd resolved running on your system, that's already running its own DNS resolver locally for like caching and performance reasons. That will already take up port 53. So if you try to run your PiHole and your system already has that, so for example, if you're using Ubuntu server or something like that, which will be available on Raspberry Pis, that will give you an error. If that happens, you need to follow what it says right here. You need to essentially disable systemd resolved and set it back to what it would normally. Now, for demonstration purposes, I've simply just changed the port here. It's 5301. So the first thing we can do is go to the web interface. Since it's running locally, I can go to localhost /admin. If you were on a PiHole, well, on a Raspberry Pi or some other device, instead of localhost, you would put in the IP address of that device. So if it's on your local internal network, it might be something like 192.168.1.5 and so on. A /admin gives you the actual admin console, which is what we're looking at now. If we log in, it gives us a lot more information too. So this is the password we said earlier. Did I forget my own password? It's bad password. I guess I must have. Let's fix that real quick. Spin that back down. Try that again. So just to double check, this should print the password in the log. Pre-existing web password found. It's not there. We'll show you without the password. Nothing ever goes smooth when you're demoing it. Right, so if you don't specify a password there, it will create a random one. And this can be annoying if you spin down the container and remove it and you spin it back up because it will be different. So I saw it just there. There it is. Assigning random password. Let's try it again. Whoa. it's not working well. We'll do it the way I had it before. Guess we'll go back to the web interface in a moment. I'll show you in the meantime the way PiHole actually works. So it will block addresses, not specific things. So this means that for websites like YouTube, it has a hard time blocking ads, but for most websites it works fine because the ads are served on a different domain. So if we try to go to something that they might not recognize, it will show up with something like this, which is a website blocked. And it tells you that the website is not found in the blacklist. So if it's blacklisted, it's going to prevent you from accessing it. So we can also test this out using a command. Oh, now I've lost it. Dig. So if you try to do a dig command, what you want to specify is the IP address. So in this case, it's just localhost, the port, which I have manually configured to be 5301, and the website you want to test this time. We're going to try Trinity News. Now, if we do that, this is one I have configured earlier to be blocked. So what happens if it's blocked is this. It will answer back by redirecting it to 0.0.0.0. So your browser will basically think it doesn't exist. If we try instead with one that we haven't configured as such, it will actually give us the IP address. It will show us the IP address that it resolved to. This is how you can test on an actual device level whether your thing is working or not. Obviously, the other way of testing it is you configure your DNS on your device to use your PiHole, and then you try to access a website that is blocked and it will not work. Now, something you probably want to do if you have it on a network-wide level is to set up your router to use PiHole as a DNS. Now, I won't be able to show you that because every router has a different interface, but somewhere in the DNS or DHCP settings, there would be a field where you can specify the primary DNS resolver. Normally, this is set to what your ISP wants. What you want to do it is change it to the IP address of the device that is hosting PiHole. Your Raspberry Pi. You can also run this on any system really, but you have to change that there if you want people who just connect to the normal network to automatically be using the PiHole. If you don't do that, every single device you would have to go into the DNS settings and set it to use the DNS of the PiHole, which can cause issues if you then go on a different network and it's still configured to use that device because it won't work. Now, that's mostly it for setting it up. There's some more advanced things you might want to do with it. These include effectively running your own DNS cache on the same system that is using PiHole, because you can basically skip over using third-party DNS resolvers, of which there are a few that are pre-configured in PiHole. The Google DNS, OpenDNS, Cloudflare. You can just you can use any of those, but you might not trust those. What you can do instead is run a program called Unbound. On Unbound, we'll set up a local recursive DNS server that contacts directly the root DNS servers for each query and will cache it locally, essentially doing the job of Cloudflare and so on without actually having to rely on them. Now, there's a caveat to that approach. If you're concerned about privacy, the best approach is to use a DNS over HTTPS or a TLS, because each DNS query will be encrypted and no one can see what websites you're visiting. The easiest way is to just configure it to using something like the Cloudflare one, which by the way is 1.1.1.1. If you go on, they will actually tell you whether you're using it or not. But if instead you want to run your own locally, you have to use Unbound. If you're doing that through Docker, there are actually images you can use that contain both, or you can set it up using Docker Compose to do both, of which there are examples in the repository there. And finally, if you're trying to essentially close everything back down, you have to remember that I only temporarily set the port here to 5301. If you want to run this, you need to set it to 53, because that's the port that DNS queries use. And if you don't do that, your own system won't use it, and that could be causing you issues. Let me just, does anyone want to add anything?
Has this broken any websites that you've used while you've been using it?
So it actually is safer than using, or simpler than using a browser-based ad blocker, because it just blocks certain domains. However, there's some things I have seen. If you have certain privacy lists enabled, it might block websites you actually want to use, or parts of websites. Now, if that happens, you simply just go into the whitelist and you whitelist the domain that is causing issues. I know that they can cause issues with Netflix, but all you do is go to the whitelist and add Netflix, and then those problems are gone.
Awesome, thanks.
What happens if you get a website that requires you to have ads enabled and doesn't let you use it if you can't, if it can't show you ads?
So actually, most of those websites should run fine, and that's because it blocks ads on a DNS level. It doesn't modify the web page itself. So the web page will basically just assume that something went wrong and the ad server is down for some reason. It doesn't know that you're trying to block them.
Cool, thank you.
Why does it have difficulty with blocking ads on YouTube?
So that's actually because Google got very sneaky, and they started, because they own the Google Ad Network and they own YouTube. What they do is they serve the Google ads on the same domain as the YouTube video you're watching. So if you try to block the domain, it will also block the video you're trying to watch. And so for those, you usually need a browser-based ad blocker. Now that's very annoying, because one of the main uses of a PiHole is actually to block ads on smart TVs. However, it wouldn't help with the YouTube app.
Does running this on a Pi actually put any load on it at all, or is it just, you know, not really something that you need to consider?
It's actually one of the most lightweight things you can be running on a Pi. The most load will come from the web server that is running the web interface, because by default it will install light PPD. But you can also, if for some reason you're running a web server for something else, like an Apache web server, you can have the installer not install the web server, and you just put the PiHole files in it.
Awesome, thanks. Well, Kev, thanks for running the event. I think we can probably stop the recording now, unless there are any more questions. Cool, awesome. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, there'll be more. There will be more events in the upcoming weeks in this series on other cool software that you can install and run on Raspberry Pis that will improve your home network in various ways. Good.